Hello. It's good to see you. Today we are going to be reading some stories from Central North Carolina. Just kind of down the middle, not on either end of the state. 'Cause, North Carolina's kind of cool. We have the mountains to the west, and then you have the central Piedmont area in the middle. And then you go on over to the east and you have the coast. You have the beach. So you can just travel a little bit here and have whatever. You can go skiing, you could go snow skiing, or you can go down to the beach and go skiing in the ocean, whatever you want to do. So we're going to be reading some stories. We're going to start out with stories about train wrecks. And this first one is about the 1906 Hamlet train wreck. Now, I don't know anything about this story or any of the other ones really, so I'm going to be learning along with you. On the hot summer day of July 22nd, 1906, at around 7:30 p.m., Seaboard Airline passenger train number 44 collided with a fruit train. The freight train carrying the fruit was westbound. The passenger train left Charlotte at 5 p.m. and was traveling at 40 miles per hour. I feel like we're getting ready to do a math problem. The two-train wreck was believed to be caused by a misunderstanding of orders, or a lap order. The lap order meant the passenger train had orders to meet the freight train at Hamlet, North Carolina. The freight train orders were to meet the passenger train at Rockingham. Now, Rockingham is really close to Hamlet. The collision occurred about 1 mile from Hamlet in a deep cut. The accident was a head-on collision between the two trains when the freight train rounded a curve. The coach for the black passengers was completely destroyed, killing everyone on board. Both locomotives were destroyed, along with the baggage car and coaches. The tracks were piled high with wreckage from the two trains. Both first and second class coaches were overturned. The lamps in the passenger coaches were extinguished during the wreck, thus preventing a fire. Railroad men, local citizens, and the uninjured worked to recover the dead and get the injured out of the crumpled mess into a hospital. There were 20 killed and 41 injured. Oh my goodness. I never heard about that. Oh my gosh, 10 years later they had another, 5 years later, 1911 Hamlet train wreck. Well, if you've ever been to Hamlet, it's still kind of a train wreck down there. No offense, but sorry, I shouldn't talk like that. At 10:40 a.m. on July 27th, 1911, one of the most disastrous train wrecks to ever happen on the Seaboard Airline Railroad happened in front of the Hamlet Roundhouse. In charge of train number 33 were conductor William Bowen and engine man Ben Koontz. The train was carrying 912 passengers, my goodness. Train number 33 was an African-American excursion run by the St. Joseph's Sunday School in Durham, North Carolina. It left Durham and was headed to Charlotte when the head-on collision occurred with a freight train from Wilmington, North Carolina, that was coming into the yard. In charge of the freight train were engineer Archie Taylor and conductor Benton Brown. Both trains heading into the yard thought the track was clear. The impact of the two-train head-on collision was heard all over town. Wow. The whistles from the roundhouse brought many Hamlet residents to the scene. The wreck destroyed 6 cars and both engines. The 4th and 5th cars were crumpled like pasteboard. The uninjured and bystanders assisted in rescuing the injured and trapped. The dead were removed to a makeshift morgue in the carpenter shop. The car seats were put on the ground under the repair shed and used as a field hospital. Doctors Kinsman and Folks from Hamlet, 4 doctors from Rockingham, and several from Laurinburg and Aberdeen arrived on the scene to render as much medical assistance as possible under the trying conditions. Mrs. Landrum, a nurse from Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, volunteered her services. A train was made up, and the injured were sent to the Good Samaritan Hospital and Mercy General Hospital in Charlotte. The property loss to Seaboard was estimated at around $80,000. That was 1911. That's $1911. No one was blamed for the accident. There were 8 dead, 60 seriously injured, and 28 with minor injuries. And here we have the 1907 Eufola. I've never heard of Eufola. I may be saying it wrong. The 1907 Eufola train wreck. I don't even know where that is. That's weird. On Sunday, July 1st, 1907, at around 10 a.m., an eastbound freight train on the western track had 9 freight cars break loose and derail. The train was pulling 20 cars. A number of the cars were loaded with cattle and sheep. There were 3 cars carrying poultry. In charge of the train were engineer Roby and conductor Henry Tomlin. Mr. Bible and C.E. Brooke were in charge of the poultry and cattle cars. The derailment happened about 9 miles west of Statesville and a quarter of a mile east of the Catawba River. The 9 cars left the track as the train was crossing a field. 4 of the 9 derailed cars were completely destroyed. The other 5 derailed cars left the track but did not overturn. A poultry car was the first to leave the track, and the other 3 cars piled on top of it. About 5,000 chickens, ducks, and turkeys were killed in the accident. The engine and the first 4 cars traveled a short distance before they could stop. The caboose and other 6 cars that remained on the track soon stopped. The engine and the 4 attached cars proceeded to Eufola, about half a mile away, to drop the cars and report the accident. The engine then returned to the scene of the accident. The trainmen and section hands began at once to clear the track and make any necessary repairs. Passenger train number 36 arrived shortly and picked up the passengers. The news of the wreck spread at lightning speed. People began showing up from everywhere. As the crowd of spectators watched the thousands of chickens, ducks, and turkeys running around in the wild, some decided to help themselves with a few and take them home for dinner. Some of the ducks made it to the river and disappeared. In the late afternoon, a wrecking train arrived with a derrick and empty poultry cars. Some of the poultry was caught, and the tracks were cleared and opened before dark. The cause of the wreck was not determined. And we have the 1908 Bessemer City train wreck. At 8:30 p.m. on a Sunday evening in August 1908, the New Orleans, New York limited train number 38 met with an accident. The accident was 1 mile south of Bessemer City, North Carolina. Train traffic on the Charlotte-Atlanta division of the Southern Railway was halted for some time due to the train accident. The tender and 1 postal car jumped the track and fell down a 30-foot embankment. The locomotive remained on the track. 1 postal car, the club car, the diner car, and part of 1 sleeper were derailed, but did not overturn. The tracks were torn up for some distance. The engineer, firemen, and passengers were not injured. 5 postal clerks, E.W. Hort, Thomas McCrae, T.L. Dean, L.H. Bolin, and C.B. White were injured in the accident, but none fatally. Wrecking trains and doctors were sent from Greenville and Spencer to the accident. The cause of the train wreck is unknown. And then we have the 1880 Charlotte train wreck. On December 27, 1880, 2 freight trains left Charlotte in sections. The first freight train left about 15 minutes ahead of the other. The 2 trains were traveling on the Seaboard Airline Railroad. The first train was under Engineer Anthony. Engineer Weisenberry was in charge of the second. On the upgrade just beyond the Paul Creek trestle, 14 cars broke loose and stopped. In the rear car were flagman Robert Griffith and 6 passengers. Flagman Griffith warned the passengers on the stopped train about the danger. He started back down the track to signal the oncoming train, but had not gotten very far when he heard the approaching train's whistle. Flagman Griffith could not go any farther down the track because of the 150-yard-long trestle. He began waving the flag as the engine came into view. As soon as Engineer Weisenberry saw the flagman, he began putting on the brakes, but it was impossible to stop the heavy train as it was nearing the bottom of one of the steepest grades on the track. Before crossing the trestle, Weisenberry put the engine in reverse. At about 7 a.m., the trains collided. At the impact, Weisenberry was knocked down by a piece of firewood. The rear of the tender was thrown to one side, diverting the full impact of the train from the engine to the side of the cut where the cars were piled up. The stopped cars piled up in one large heap and caught fire. There was 1 injured and 4 killed. This is kind of sad. Why am I reading about train wrecks? I don't know. This video is a train wreck. Okay. This is the 1909 Reedy Fork train wreck. On December 15th, 1909, passenger train number 11, also known as the Richmond and Atlantic train, was traveling on the Southern Railway. At 6:32 a.m., the train derailed and wrecked at the Reedy Fork trestle. The train was carrying 2 baggage cars, an express car, several mail cars, 3 day coaches, and 2 Pullmans. The derailment was caused by a broken rail about 200 feet from the trestle. The right rail had broken about 18 inches from the joint. The rail was broken into many pieces for several feet and completely torn from the cross tie. The engine, baggage, mail, and express cars passed over the broken rail without any problem. The wheels of the day coaches went over the damaged rail, allowing the axles to fall on the guardrails of the bridge. The last 5 coaches went off the trestle and fell about 30 feet into the water below the trestle. Most of those injured and killed were in the sleeper car, the Richmond. The Norfolk sleeper was also damaged. There were 12 dead and 25 injured. By 5:00 p.m., the tracks had been cleared, but there were still 3 cars in the water. And then we have the 1884 Salisbury train wreck. In the early morning of August 20th, 1884, freight train number 19 left Charlotte in two sections. Captain A.B. White was the conductor on the section that left 10 minutes ahead of the other section, and Captain Albright was the conductor on the second section. Conductor Albright and Engineer Smith from Section 2 left their train to get breakfast. The fireman was put in charge until the return of the conductor and engineer. The pay train was in the area, and the fireman left the engine to go get his pay. No one knew that while the engine had been waiting, the valves had been leaking. The cylinders were filling up with steam. When enough steam had built up in the cylinders, the wheels started to turn. As the train slowly moved, the valves continued to open until the train was traveling at full speed. When the fireman returned, the train was disappearing into the distance. Section 2 was made up of the engine and 4 cars. Section 1 had just reached the water tank just beyond the Yadkin River Bridge and was preparing to take on water. Conductor White was working in the caboose when suddenly the horrible thundering sound of a runaway train broke the otherwise stillness of the day. Before Conductor White could take any action or remove himself from the caboose, the runaway train tore through with a mighty force, smashing the car into tiny pieces, leaving nothing resembling a caboose. The runaway train was traveling at about 50 miles an hour when the two trains impacted. The crew of Section 1 immediately began working to free the conductor. With Conductor White's quick thinking, he managed to survive the horrendous crash. He was seriously injured and transported to a medical facility in Salisbury. Witnesses say the runaway train was the fastest train they ever saw go over Yadkin Bridge. The wrecked engine was returned to Salisbury and the track cleared as soon as possible to prevent delays from other trains. And then we have the 1889 Mizpah train wreck. A lot of trains banging into one another back then. On the cold winter night of January 28, 1889, at around 9 p.m., northbound freight train number 109 wrecked at a siding at Mizpah, North Carolina. Mizpah. The 109 left Charlotte pulling 35 cars. The accident took place where the north and southbound trains meet at what railroad men called a spur. It is a piece of track where the northbound train can pull off so the southbound train can safely pass by. It can only be entered by the northbound train. The siding ends abruptly on the trestle over the creek. The train was approaching the siding and going down grade at about 35 miles an hour. When the pilot wheels hit the switch, the engine jerked to the right, moving forward on the spur. The engineer, realizing something wasn't right, called out for the crew to abandon the train as he was jumping from it. Before the crew realized what was going on, it was too late. For some reason, this time the switch was misplaced. When the engine reached the end of the siding, it continued on and plunged into the creek bed, carrying all 14 cars with it. Flames began to shoot up from the train wreckage. The crew could see the fireman was pinned down. They poured buckets of water on him to prevent him from being burned alive. Sidney Lee, the brakeman, was buried beneath the train and never found. He was the only death attributed to this accident. The Reedsville Fire Department arrived on the scene and put out the fire. The fireman was rescued at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. The inspectors believed the switch had been turned in order to intentionally wreck the train. And then we have a 1965 train and pickup collision. On July 10th, 1965, a pickup truck loaded with 2 members of the Rock Hill Blue Devils, an Indian Sandlot baseball team, and a group of spectators was struck by an Atlantic Coastline Railroad freight train as the pickup was trying to cross the railroad tracks ahead of the train. The accident occurred at a high-banked rural crossing about 2.5 miles southeast of Laurinburg, North Carolina. I think they misspelled Laurinburg. I think that's an I. The 2 members of the ball team were killed. The other deaths were the spectators. The driver of the truck was the lone survivor. The rest of the team had gone on ahead in 2 cars. Robeson County Police said the truck just pulled in front of the oncoming train. Highway Patrolman J.E. Powell said the truck was knocked about 45 feet from where the impact occurred. The bodies were strewn between 50 and 300 feet from the impact. The train was pulling 2 cars and a caboose. There were no deaths on the train. This is a story about a mining catastrophe. That sounds sad. I don't know that it's any worse than train wrecks. I don't want to read that. Steamer Olive struck by tornado. Sometimes my cat Olive acts like a steam train. Oh, it's a boat. Okay, it's not a steamer. God, okay. On February 17th, 1903, at around 11 a.m., the passenger ship Olive, a single-screw steamboat owned by J.A. Pertlow of Franklin, Virginia, left that city. At 9 p.m., the passenger ship passed Holly's Wharf. The Olive was navigating the Chowan River in North Carolina between Mount Pleasant and Oliver's Wharf. The Olive had been making regular trips between Virginia and North Carolina for several years. The weather was continuing to decline and finally became so fierce that Captain Withy turned the Olive around to return up the river for safety. At 2 a.m., everything became inky black. There was no light except the lights on the Olive. There was no visibility. A terrible roaring sound broke through the sound of the wind. Something struck the Olive on its port beam and turned the ship on its side. A tidal wave passed over the disabled ship and flooded the hold. In less than 2 minutes, the steamboat Olive was resting on the bottom of the Chowan River. The pilot house was the only part to remain above water. Most of the passengers and crew were below and had no chance to escape. Captain George H. Withy and 5 others survived standing in waist-deep water in the pilot house until 6 a.m. in the morning when a Norfolk and Southern steamer rescued them. They were let off at Edenton. Oh, Edenton is a beautiful place. That's definitely not in the center of the state, though. Engineer Conway, Assistant J.P. Murphy, J.N. Bell, and 5 other unnamed persons left on a lifeboat. Those in the lifeboat were picked up several hours later by the tugboat Gazelle of the John L. Roper Lumber Company. They were dropped off at Tunis. 18 people died in the accident. 5 years before the weather caused this accident, The steamer sprang a leak and went down within sight of this disaster. The Olive was an inland passenger steamer from Norfolk, Virginia. It was built in 1869, weighing 287 tons, 120 feet 9 inches long, with a beam of 20 feet 4 inches and a hold depth of 7 feet. And this is a story about a 1957 Fort Bragg lightning strike. These are not Central North Carolina stories. That's fine. On June 19th, 1957, a severe thunderstorm moved across Fort Bragg, North Carolina, between 5 and 6 p.m., bringing lightning bolts from the electrical storm that struck Fort Bragg bivouac troops. Within a 10-minute period, lightning struck twice, killing 2 National Guardsmen and injuring 47 others. Units of the 10th Old Hickory Division of the North Carolina National Guard took the worst part of the severe weather. The Guardsmen were camped in the woods for their summer training. They were about 10 miles west of the main base. The lightning struck twice during supper time, while many of the National Guardsmen were standing in line with their mess kits. Many of the Guardsmen were knocked down like bowling pins. The primary damage was centered on the bivouac area. Private First Class Truesdale's mess kit was knocked from his hand and bent out of shape by the force of the lightning strike. While the uninjured were trying to help the injured, another lightning bolt struck. The lightning bolt skipped around the bivouac area, injuring more National Guardsmen. The ground shook something terrible. Many of the Guardsmen reported that their feet felt like the ground was burning up. Guardsmen were calling for the medic, who was also knocked down. One of the cooks was knocked out by the lightning bolt. The base hospital called in off-duty medical personnel to assist with the 47 injured Guardsmen. 4 of the Guardsmen were admitted to the hospital as patients. The others remained at the hospital overnight for observation. More than 3 miles from the center of the storm, Captain Britt was on a field phone when an electrical jolt threw him across a tent. Lieutenant Colonel Hillebrand was miles away when his right eye was injured because he received a shock through a telephone receiver. Oh, that's terrible. And then, finally, we have this story about 1936 Greensboro tornadoes. I don't know anything about this. On April 1st and 2nd, 1936, Greensboro, North Carolina saw 12 tornadoes in a 14-hour period. The tornado outbreak was caused by a supercell storm system. The tornadoes caused great destruction across North Carolina. Some tornadoes reached an F4 on the Fujita scale. The tornadoes developed in 3 waves. These were the first recorded tornadoes in the history of Greensboro. On April 2nd, the tornadoes that hit Greensboro left a path of F4 damage to the city. The south side of the city sustained most of the damage. One tornado touched down near High Point Road and Elm Street and continued east to the east of Bennett College. The tornado cut a path 2.5 miles long and 4 blocks wide. I do remember hearing about that. The 400 block of Gorell Street had only one building left on the foundation. I had to pause while a plane flew over. It sounded like it was going to land on the house. I'm reading about all this destruction, had me worried. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I didn't die. Everything's good. It may crash on somebody else's house, but it didn't hit mine. The tornado passed within 1 mile north of Mebane. Good God, that's not close. Destroying 3 homes, killing 1 person and injuring 5 others. The tornadoes did $2 million in damage just in Greensboro and were responsible for 14 deaths and 144 injuries. This was the 2nd deadliest tornado in North Carolina history. In addition, 56 buildings were completely destroyed and 233 more were damaged. Crews armed with shovels, picks, axes, and a few tractors dug through the ruins in search of survivors. More disasters were coming. Fires followed the tornadoes despite a downpour of rain. Industrial plants were completely wiped out, including the old El Moro cigar plant, the George C. Brown Lumber Company, the J.D. Wilkins Steelworks plant, the Red Band Flour plant, the Dillard Paper Company, the Sinclair Refining Company, and the Glasscock Stone and Manufacturing Company. The only thing left undamaged at the Sinclair plant was the storage tanks. The Blue Bell Overall Company was also damaged. 44 deaths in North Carolina were attributed to the tornado outbreak. And I do remember hearing about that. I did a walking tour of downtown Greensboro a couple of summers ago, and I now remember them talking about that. Let's see if I can find, I want to find something. These are all kind of sad. 2 hydrogen bombs fall on North Carolina. Well, they've all been kind of sad. Let's end with a couple of H-bombs. Okay? That sounds good. I didn't say this was going to be a fun video. On January 23rd, another source says 24th, 1961, bright orange flames lit up the sky over the town of Faro in Wayne County, North Carolina. Only 3 days after the inauguration of President John F. Kennedy. With the fear of the Cold War on everyone's mind, American bombers were kept airborne at all times. The aircraft, a B-52 Stratofortress bomber, had been patrolling over the Atlantic Ocean. 12 hours had passed since the B-52 left Seymour Johnson Air Force Base near Goldsboro, North Carolina, with a crew of 8. The bomber was carrying 2 3.8 megaton Mark 39 hydrogen bombs. Each hydrogen bomb had 260 times the explosive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. The B-52 was part of a fleet of 12 bombers in the air, prepared to defend the United States against a Soviet attack. Around midnight on January 23rd or 24th, the B-52 rendezvoused with an air tanker for an aerial refueling. During the refueling, the tanker notified the B-52 commander, Major Walter Tulloch, that there was a fuel leak in the right wing. They aborted the refueling and notified ground control of the situation. Ground control directed the B-52 to assume a holding pattern off the coast until most of the fuel had been used. Fuel started to pour out of the wing. 19 tons were dropped in 2 minutes. Ground control directed the B-52 to return to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. The pilot made an unsuccessful attempt to get back to the base. At 10,000 feet, the right wing broke off the plane. The pilot ordered the crew to jump. At 9,000 feet, 5 crewmen jumped into the darkness and safely landed. The 6th man jumped but didn't survive. The plane went into a spin and nosedived straight down to earth. 2 died in the crash. Witnesses reported the plane explosion looked like daylight. Other witnesses compared it to a Roman candle. a farmer saw his fields light up with fireballs. Some of the locals thought that Armageddon had come. None of the locals knew what had happened. The debris field was north of Musgrave's Crossroads near Faro and Eureka, 15 miles from Goldsboro. The 2 hydrogen bombs broke loose and plunged to the ground. One of the hydrogen bombs landed in a field with its parachute tangled in the tree limbs. The second bomb didn't land so softly. It was entombed in the ground after falling at 700 miles per hour. Each bomb carried a payload of 4 megatons, the equivalent of 4 million tons of TNT. When Earl Lancaster, Faro Volunteer Fire Department Assistant Chief, arrived on the scene, everything was burning. Within the hour, military helicopters were in the area. Military officials evacuated everyone in the area. The military kept it secret just how close the accident came to causing a nuclear catastrophe of biblical proportions. The Air Force reported that at no time was there any chance of a nuclear explosion. A secret document published in declassified form by The Guardian revealed another side of the story. The document, obtained by investigative journalist Eric Schlosser under the Freedom of Information Act, gave conclusive evidence that the United States narrowly escaped a nuclear disaster of monumental proportions. One simple dynamo technology low-voltage switch stood between a safe fall and a catastrophe of epic proportions. All 4 of the safety mechanisms worked perfectly on one of the bombs, but 3 failed to work on the other one. If one of the bombs had exploded, lethal fallout could have gone as far as Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and New York City. It would have killed everything within an 8.5-mile radius. When the government was trying to recover the bomb that was buried, it continuously ran into water problems. As workers dug the hole deeper, it continued to fill up. They continued to pump out the water, but were unsuccessful at recovering the entire buried bomb. The military purchased an easement from Davis, only name given, and his heirs. The agreement states that no current or future landowner may dig or drill deeper than 5 feet or use the land in any manner other than growing crops, timber, or pasture land. The government still collects samples from wells near the crash. The official report from the Pentagon states that pieces of the bomb that crashed into the swamp broke off. One of those pieces was never found. Dr. Jack Revelle was the officer who deactivated the bombs at the crash site. And that is where we're going to stop. So, one way you can look at these stories is at least you weren't in a train wreck today and you didn't have a bomb fall on you. I always try to look at the brighter side of things and try to find the good things in life. Even stories about this, like this kind of stuff. At least you weren't in a train wreck today. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed listening to these stories today. And I hope to see you again really soon.